CBS presents this program in color.
From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, home of the world's greatest musical events, another program of New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein. This award-winning series is brought to you by AT&T and the Bell System Associated Companies. And here is Leonard Bernstein.
Well, my dear young friends, the first piece we're going to hear lasts less than 2 minutes, but its title takes almost that long to say. This captivating title is The Gong on the Hook and Ladder, or Fireman's Parade on Main Street, unquote. And that should tell you almost everything you need to know about the piece. A small-town parade, a good deal of general commotion, and a dreadful local amateur band playing out of tune and with very shaky rhythm. Here goes The Gong on the Hook and Ladder. Don't clap. Let me ask you a question. That's the whole piece. If you had heard that rather bizarre piece of music without knowing its title or its composer, what would you have said it was? Something by a composer from outer space, or maybe by a child, or something the orchestra is making up as it goes along? You wouldn't say that. You're too smart. But I'll bet you'd say it was something modern. In fact, very modern, probably one of those wild musical experiments that the bright, new, young composers are making these days. Well, the composer in question is not only not new, but indeed very old, in fact, quite dead. In fact, the little piece we just heard was written by Charles Edward Ives over 50 years ago, in the very first years of this century, before any of the big modern experiments by Schoenberg or Stravinsky had even begun to be made. Just imagine, in those early 1900s, what was called crazy modern music then consisted of Debussy, Ravel, Richard Strauss, all composers we think of today as pretty stodgy old-timers. And yet, in those very same early years, this salty Connecticut Yankee named Ives was already madly pursuing his own offbeat ideas, writing music that no one could decipher, no one could play, and no one cared to hear. And the more nobody cared, the more he wrote, each piece madder and wilder and more revolutionary than the last. Does this mean that Ives was mad? Not at all. He was a very serious businessman, and a successful one at that. But his insurance business didn't keep him from spending most of his time writing music, strange pieces like the one we just heard, which is, frankly, a bit mad. But you must remember that Ives was both a genius and a pioneer. And geniuses and pioneers are two kinds of people who always seem to have a touch of madness, a good kind of madness. Think of our early American pioneers. Weren't they just a bit mad to go trekking westward across a wild continent, exposing themselves to Indians, bandits, hunger, storms, whatnot? Well, Ives was very much like them. He was an adventurer, too, a musical pioneer. Nothing could stop him. But really, to understand Ives, or any adventurer for that matter, we must remember that the spirit of adventure is just another way of saying the spirit of play, the sporting instinct. That is, doing things simply for the fun of doing them. Now, I've always thought that word fun was unjustly belittled. It's a wonderful word, and I believe it applies just as much to music as to roller coaster rides or swimming or movies or anything. And once you get the idea of how important fun was in Ives' mind, then you begin to hear his music with new ears, and you begin to understand why that fireman's parade we just played sounds so freakish. For instance, why there are so many different rhythms going on in the orchestra at the same time, so that it sounds all mixed up. Why? Because it's fun. Not, mind you, that it's easy to write this kind of mixed-up music. It took great skill on Ives' part to set down those notes in the exactly wrong way he had heard music played by that awful local band, with all the instruments a little bit apart and ragged, and sour harmonies and wrong notes in the tunes, but everybody having a wonderful time, as amateurs do. And Ives had an equally good time writing this musical picture of a fireman's parade down Main Street with a gong banging away on the big, shiny red fire engine, and noise and confusion and general hilarity. And what better way to show it than have all these different rhythms going on at once? And it's not just the rhythms either. What about those notes, those howling dissonances? Well, they're also a part of the fun, of the general hilarious goings-on. And this spirit of fun also explains why, after all the confusion, there suddenly emerges toward the end that innocent and plaintive little tune, My Darling Clementine. And so the parade ends in a fizzle, like a wet firecracker. And Ives ended it that way on purpose, just blah. Again, why? Did everyone run home because it suddenly began to rain? I doubt it. Was it all just a dream from which we have awakened with a fuzzy head? That's perhaps more likely. But what we can know for sure is that it's Ives having fun, doing the unexpected thing, even the disappointing thing, the purposefully disappointing thing, ending his piece by good-naturedly thumbing his nose at his listeners. They weren't listening anyway, so what did he care? He didn't have listeners. His pieces were simply too hard to play. He didn't have audiences. In fact, as far as I know, this performance a few moments ago of the Fireman's Parade has been the first ever given in a concert hall. And we're very proud of that. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that Ives' music is all jokes and games, like that piece. He wrote 4 very serious symphonies, over 100 songs, a mystical piano sonata that lasts an hour, all sorts of things like that. But in every piece of his, however serious it may be, in one way or another, we find this spirit of fun, whether it shows itself in kooky rhythms or in dissonant notes or in surprise endings or simply in the astonishing way he has of suddenly quoting other people's music. These quotes can be anything from My Darling Clementine, as we just heard, all the way to Beethoven's Fifth or Brahms' First, and all the way back again to bugle calls and ragtime tunes or Swanee River. It's again that spirit of play, playing with music, his own and other people's music. And in the next piece, we're going to hear a perfectly serious work called Washington's Birthday. You'll hear at least 5 or a dozen such quotes, all of them cozy, hometown, old-fashioned tunes. Now, there's a reason for this. Ives was born and raised in Danbury, Connecticut, and although his business life eventually took him to New York City, he always returned to Connecticut, to that small-town life that he loved. And to his dying day, he remained a country boy at heart. And the musical memories of his childhood, the local marching bands, the fiddling and fifing at barn dances, the hymns, the patriotic songs, the sentimental tunes and folk ditties, all these haunted his music as long as he lived. So no matter how pioneering his music gets, how daring, adventurous, complicated, modernistic, if you will, there are always musical reminders of the old days, the music he heard as a boy. And this gives a sad, old-fashioned sweetness to Ives' music, especially when it's mixed with the strange new sounds that he invented. Now, this Washington's Birthday we're going to hear is exactly such a piece, mysterious and nostalgic, and yet, like all the others, full of fun. It was written to be the first movement of a symphony of holidays, the other 3 being Decoration Day, the 4th of July, and Thanksgiving, all exciting American holidays. And they are all exciting pieces, too. But Washington's Birthday is the most exciting of all. It begins, bleakly enough, with vague mutterings by the muted strings, depicting the stern, mysterious, powerful New England winter, forbidding. But almost at once, there is one of those peculiar quotes, a French horn singing out way down upon the Swanee River, of all things. Well, almost Swanee River. You see why I say a peculiar quote. It's not exactly Swanee River, and yet it is, in some odd, drooping way, like something hazily remembered from long ago. This hazy winter picture that Ives is painting eventually builds up to quite a noise. Nothing realistic, no whistling winds or that sort of thing, rather an inner image of winter, gray, somber, difficult, unyielding. And then suddenly, a barn dance breaks out in great high spirits. And in this dance section, which of course is the real celebration of Washington's birthday, you'll hear lots of those peculiar quotes. First of all, this familiar sailor's hornpipe. And then the famous Camptown races. All a bit peculiar, you notice. And then, of course, comes that barn dance favorite, Turkey in the Straw. It's very peculiar, that one. And now comes the maddest of all, which is a string of old-time Irish reels, or jigs, leading off with The Campbells Are Coming, which is Scottish, I know. But anyway, it's played by a horn, and, now get this, a Jew's harp. I don't know if you've ever seen a Jew's harp. It's not a harp, and it has nothing to do with anything Jewish. The name is simply a corruption of Jaw's harp. since this tiny instrument is played between the teeth. And then the player twangs a little metal tab with his finger, and out comes, well, a twang. Of course, it's a tiny twang, so we have to amplify it. I'm sure you'll recognize the sound. That's also the Campbells Are Coming, in case you don't recognize the tune. Now, only Charles Ives could have thought of this insane combination of horn and Jew's harp, playing The Campbells Are Coming, written deliberately out of tune and out of time, while, mind you, the rest of the orchestra is going wild with its own barn dance music. Altogether, it makes quite a riot. You think that's crazy? Well, it gets even crazier until it finally reaches one of those typical Ives blasts, and suddenly there's silence and a whispered, sentimental old tune, heartbreakingly beautiful, by the way, while in a whole other key, one lone fiddle, at the same time, in another key, is dreamily recalling Turkey in the Straw. He'll be sitting over there. You watch for him. And finally, to the strains of Good Night, Ladies, Good Night, Ladies, the whole dream disappears and the winter darkness takes over. You see, it was a dream. All Ives' pieces are dreams, dreams of childhood and a vanished world. I think you're going to enjoy Washington's Birthday. An extraordinary piece, Washington's Birthday. I'd go so far as to say a great piece. Sometimes I think it's Ives' supreme masterpiece. It's so personal, so mysterious, and unlike anything else ever written. And it's over half a century old, like all his major works, because although Ives lived a long time, till 1954, almost to the age of 80, he had stopped composing as long ago as 1916, except for some songs and tiny things he wrote in the 20s. His health just gave out under the strain of leading this double life of being a full-time businessman and a full-time composer. So it's all the more amazing that this Washington's Birthday was written as long ago as 1913, which makes it, therefore, oddly enough, late Ives, if you follow me, because it's a piece which sounds as though it could have been written yesterday or even tomorrow. Now, by way of contrast, we are going to hear some early Ives, a little piece called Circus Band March, which he wrote as a young man of 20, way back in 1894. And this one is pure fun. It's just what its title says, a circus band march. Of course, it's not your everyday circus band march. After all, it is by Ives, so it couldn't be ordinary, but it is a circus band march. And this peppy little number, peppery also, exists in two versions, one for orchestra alone and one with a chorus singing some rather odd, nutty words written by Ives himself. We've decided to do without the chorus, since you can't understand the words the chorus is singing anyway while the circus band is blaring away. So here comes, minus a chorus, the Circus Band March. As you have heard, old Ives had lots of jokes up his sleeve. But one thing is for sure, it's no joke to play these pieces. Not so much the circus march, but certainly the first two. They're incredibly difficult to perform, even for the mighty New York Philharmonic, and to play one Ives piece after another is quite a strain. So we're now going to give the orchestra a short rest while we hear a song by Ives for voice and piano only. Some people think that Ives was at his very greatest as a writer of songs. As I told you before, he wrote over 100 of them. And the one we're going to hear is one of his most magnificent achievements. It's called Lincoln, the Great Commoner. And it's no ordinary song, no simple melody with accompaniment. It's like a monument, a tremendous and awe-inspiring structure. When we listen to this song about Lincoln, our understanding of Ives begins to grow, because we've already known him through the Fireman's Parade piece at the beginning as a man who loved his hometown, Main Street in Danbury, Connecticut. And in Washington's Birthday, we got a larger view. We saw Ives as one who loved New England, the country life, the power and mystery of nature. And now we shall see him as a patriot, a man who adored his country. This streak of patriotism runs all through Ives' music, just as it runs through the poetry of Walt Whitman. In fact, Ives and Whitman are very much alike, the same enormous energy, vitality, humor, and boyish exuberance streams from both of them. But Ives went much further with his music than Whitman did with words, because Ives actually created a new musical language for himself, as you are now going to hear in this song. Since it's a song about a rail splitter named Abe Lincoln, it's naturally quite hammery and a bit of an ear splitter as well, I warn you. You will also hear in it some more of those peculiar quotes that were so dear to his heart, only this time the quotes are all, naturally, from patriotic songs, like the Star-Spangled Banner, and Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, America, and so on. In fact, let's see if you can recognize a couple of these quotes. They're not so easy to recognize because they're all dressed up in Ives' strange new language. For instance, which one do you think this is? Any suggestions? No? Well, I didn't think it would be easy for you. Just listen to the left hand alone. Is that better? Now, you see what that's right, exactly. It's Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, better known as Battle Hymn of the Republic, or less well known, I should say. And now, if you hear that in the left hand with what he's got in the right hand, you'll see what I mean by his strange new music. It's not quite the same thing, is it? But I don't think you'll have any trouble recognizing this, because this will be in the singing part, in the voice part. Just like that. What is it? Right. It's America. But, of course, the piano part will blur it up a good deal with all kinds of unrelated notes. How about this one? This isn't easy either. What is it? Right, it's a Star-Spangled Banner. Slightly screwy version of it. And you may not think it very patriotic to treat the Star-Spangled Banner that way, but from Ives' point of view, it was intensely patriotic. He was not by any means being disrespectful to the national anthem. On the contrary, he, in his own mind, was making it richer and more colorful by adding his own strong musical feelings to it. In fact, the very ending of the song is that same opening phrase from the national anthem, not dissonant this time, but doing something equally strange, which is switching keys in the middle of the phrase. And then in typical Ives fashion, he adds one of his surprising soft dissonant chords so that the song ends on a note of mystery. But he's not even content to stick with that last chord. It's too ordinary for him. What an original and amazing mind that man had. And now to sing this song for us, we are fortunate to have Mr. Simon Estes, that splendid American bass baritone who knocked them dead in Moscow last year at the Tchaikovsky competition. Just before Mr. Estes sings it, I'd like to read you the words of the song so you'll already know them and be able to concentrate as hard as possible on the music itself. It needs concentration. These words are by the American poet Edwin Markham, and they go like this. And so he came from the prairie cabin to the capital. One fair ideal led our chieftain on. He built the rail pile as he built the state, the conscience testing every stroke to make his deed the measure of the man. So came our captain with the mighty heart, and when the step of earthquake shook the house, wrenching rafters from their ancient hold, and here Ives goes really mad and has the pianist pound chords on the piano with his fists, like this. And where was I? And when the step of earthquake shook the house, wrenching rafters from their ancient hold, he held the ridgepole up and spiked again the rafters of the home. He held his place. He held the long purpose like a growing tree, held on through blame and faltered not at praise. And when he fell in whirlwind, he went down as when a kingly cedar, green with boughs, goes down with a great shout upon the hills. And here is Mr. Estes to sing Lincoln, the Great Commoner. Now, that was an earful, and I hope it wasn't too much for you. But you must never forget the pioneering genius that was Charles Ives. His spirit of adventure, of play, took him way beyond the borders of us ordinary mortals. And in the next work the orchestra will play, I hope they're quite rested now, Ives takes us even farther along in his mysterious adventures. The piece we're going to hear is, without doubt, his most famous work, called The Unanswered Question. I don't know if it's famous enough for you to have heard it, but it's one Ives work that is played and known all over the world. This short piece takes us a long way from Danbury, Connecticut, beyond New England, beyond America, out to the universe itself. Ives is now dealing with the greatest mysteries of life, asking the age-old question, why do we exist? And Ives assigns this question to a solo trumpet who intones it 6 separate times. It goes like this. See how exactly like a question that is? And each time there comes an answer, or an attempt at an answer, from a group of woodwinds. And the first answer comes very slow and indefinite. The second is faster, and the third still faster. And by the time we get to the 6th, it's so fast it comes out like wild babbling. Now, these woodwinds, according to Ives, represent our human answers, growing increasingly impatient and desperate until they lose their meaning entirely. And all this time, right from the very beginning, the strings have been playing their own separate music, infinitely soft and slow and sustained, never changing, never growing louder or faster, never being affected in any way by that strange question and answer dialogue of the trumpet and the woodwinds. It's as though the strings were the great galaxy of stars which keeps slowly, imperceptibly circling about over our heads as we go about our business asking questions and trying to give answers. And however hard we try, the stars keep circling, unchanging and unconcerned. And then finally, the trumpet asks his question for the 7th time. But this time, there comes no answer at all, only the silent, slow motion of the universe, ceaseless. What an idea for a piece of music, huh? And you may well ask at this point, but what has happened to that spirit of play, that adventure that you talked about earlier? Oh, but what a spirit of play there is in this piece. Think of how adventurous a mind has to be to think up this concept of 2 separate musics at once, totally independent of each other in time or rhythm or key or anything. That's really playing with music. It's a concept that is now popular among some of the new young composers, but this unanswered question was written in 1908, almost 60 years ago. Think of it. So you see, Ives was not only a pioneer, he was also our first great American composer. All alone in his Connecticut barn, he created his own private musical revolution, whose rumblings are only now beginning to be understood. And these rumblings, which we shall now hear, I must warn you, are very soft indeed. In fact, we are breaking a hallowed tradition of the concert hall by ending our program with a soft, slow piece. It's almost never done. But if Ives could pioneer, so can we. It's all in the spirit of adventure, and I'm sure you'll all go along with it.
From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, the third of this season's New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein, has presented Charles Ives, American Pioneer. Featured in today's performance were The Gong on the Hook and Ladder, or Fireman's Parade on Main Street, Washington's Birthday from the symphony Holidays, Lincoln, the Great Commoner, sung by Simon Estes, and The Unanswered Question. The next program in this series will be seen in 8 weeks, on Wednesday, April 19th, when Mr. Bernstein will present the return engagement of 3 outstanding young performers who made their debuts on the Young People's Concerts: Andre Watts, pianist, Veronica Tyler, soprano, and Stephen Cates, cellist. This program was recorded in Philharmonic Hall and was produced and directed by Roger Englander. The New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts are brought to you by AT&T and the Bell System Associated Companies, who thank you for being with us tonight. Films of many of these concerts are available without charge to schools and other groups. For information, call your local Bell Telephone business office.